Everyone, please take your seats so we can begin our meeting. Good morning. That means you're paying attention. I'm Lorraine Miller, and along with my new best friend of old, Jim Roosevelt, we serve as the co-chairs of the DNC Rules and Bylaws Committee. Would committee members and our audience, would you stand and with me and pledge allegiance to our flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get into the much admirer of our meeting, I want the committee to be aware that today is the birthday of one of our colleagues, Frank Leon. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Frankie. Happy birthday to you. Yeah.
No better way to spend my birthday than
All right, boys and girls, we can start to this meeting. We will now call the roll to determine if we have a quorum, and for that, I'd like to recognize our wonderful parliamentarian, Helen McFadden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A quick count shows you have a quorum, but let's go through this. Mr. Abraham has given his proxy to Ms. Ruiz, Mr. Berman, Ms. Blumko, Ms. Brazil, here, Mr. Brennan, here, Ms. Cardona, Ms. Daughtry, Mr. Fowler, here, Ms. Gallardo-Rucker, Mr. Goodman, Ms. Higgins, here, Mr. Ickes, here, Ms. Kmart, here, Mr. Leon, here, Ms. Lewis, Mr. Liu, here, Ms. Martinez, Mr. McDonald, here, Mr. Martin, here. Ms. Moore has given her proxy to Ms. Brazil. Ms. Mount has given her proxy to Ms. Lewis. Mr. Nutter has given his proxy to Ms. Daughtry. Mr. Ray, here. Mr. Ruiz, Mr. Spade, here. Ms. Sullivan, here. Mr. Saunders, Ms. Swecker, here. Ms. Weingarten, here. Mr. Zuddy has given his proxy to Mr. Martin. That accounts for 100% of this committee, Mr. Chairman.
We obviously then have a quorum, which is 40% of the members present in person or by proxy. As you may be aware, the party's bylaws contain an attendance requirement. Just so that nobody forgets, remember that members who missed 3 consecutive RBC meetings are deemed to have resigned from the committee. Registering a proxy, while important for establishing a quorum as we just did, and assuring that your vote is represented, does not count for the purpose of attending a meeting. I will point out that our parliamentarian, Helen McFadden, is always available to answer any questions we may have, and we are grateful for that.
Before we get started today, we have several announcements and updates. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the party affairs staff and the DNC Council, what Patrice and the staff do for us. Plus, our council is outstanding. And committee, we want to acknowledge that these folks work day and night, conference call after conference call, meeting after meeting, on behalf of this committee and other committees of the DNC. And so let's give them a round of applause. We have an outstanding team, and they're always available. Now that we're in the midst of the presidential cycle, I wanted to take a moment to discuss an extremely important rule that is related to this process. As you may be aware, Article 5, Section 4 of the Charter requires that all officers and DNC staff remain neutral in the presidential nominating process. The DNC is absolutely committed to impartiality in the presidential primary process. We take any situations that could violate our party's rules very seriously. So the officers and DNC staff are made aware of our party's policy on remaining impartial in the presidential nominating process and understand that this is a requirement of their continued service to the party. To make certain that everyone is clear that maintaining neutrality is required, DNC officers and staff have policies that govern their conduct during this process, and they are up on the DNC website. Because of the work that we do, Jim and I have adopted this policy as our own and will remain neutral throughout this process. Yay. We know that RBC members are not subject to the impartiality provisions, but we ask that if you become affiliated with a presidential campaign, particularly in an official position, you let us know. We want to ensure that this committee has an open and transparent process throughout this entire cycle. At the start of each meeting, we go around the room and ask members to disclose publicly if they are involved with a particular campaign or supporting a candidate in a way that should be disclosed. So, yes, Brother Saunders, will you start us out with our declarations of campaign support?
We're supporting anybody who's going to be Trump.
Michael, everybody, you got it?
We're supporting anybody who's going to be Trump, so we have a ready. Okay?
Ms. Brazil?
I'm still loving everyone, but not giving anyone money. So I'm still neutral.
Still neutral.
Can I announce your name so we'll...
Elaine K. Mark, still neutral.
I'm Emmy Ruiz and I'm supporting Kamala Harris.
Jason Rennie, and as an officer, remain neutral.
I'm Leah Daughtry. I'm giving a bunch of folks money, but I'm not.
Ken Martin, as Vice Chair of the DNC, I am neutral.
Chris Liu, no formal affiliation with the campaign.
Yvette Lewis, no formal affiliation, but we have given money.
Becky Higgins, I'm neutral.
Harold McKee's nothing to disclose.
Don Feller, I'm neutral, is not endorsing anyone.
Like some of the others, I am neutral, but have given some small donations to a few candidates, some of whom have already dropped out.
Scott Brennan, I'm neutral, but my wife and I have hosted a number of campaign staff in our house.
May I ask in that regard, from various campaigns or one particular campaign?
Multiple campaigns.
Dennis Spade, neutral.
The Party Blanco neutral have donated small amounts to a few candidates.
Maria Cardona, neutral, have given money to some candidates.
Alexandra Gallardo Roker, I have my favorites but remain neutral.
Iris Martinez, I've been in conversations early on with the Biden campaign, but I have not given any money to anyone, including him. Good afternoon, Susan Smucker, Chair of Virginia Democratic Party, neutral.
Barry Goodman, I am maxed out to the Biden campaign and involved in his finance operation in Michigan. I'm also doing another campaign as part of the process of helping those that look to assistance given.
David McDonald, Washington, Madam Chair. I think it's fair to say that I am not involved with such a complicated word, any campaign, nor do I have any relationships. I do love them all, as everybody else does, and I am neutral.
Frankly, I'm undecided.
Jeff Berman, supporting federal rule.
Randy Weingarten, like several people here, have given small donations to get people on the debate stage, but I am, and our union is thus far online.
Thank you. Thank all of you.
So, my co-chair and very good friend Lorraine Miller usually mentions how much our neutrality policy, how much money that saved me.
In addition, I'd like to also acknowledge the representatives from our presidential campaigns are here with us today. Would you stand and state the name of your state and your campaign that you're representing? Anybody representing a presidential campaign? Oh, great. Let's start here on my right with your left.
My name is Lainey Edmiston and I represent Amy Klobuchar.
Okay. Speak up loudly, shout so we can hear you.
My name is Lainey Edmiston and I represent Amy Klobuchar.
Justine Turner, Elizabeth Warren.
George Vernado, Mayor Pete.
Ali Dawkins, Mayor Pete.
Simon Van, representing Cory Booker.
Shia Shamali, Cory Booker.
Patrick Moore, Vice President Biden.
Arlen Ray, Vice President Biden.
Matt Burke, Bernie Sanders.
Bernie Sanders,
Brandon Neal, Mayor Pete.
Cash Harrison, Mayor
Travis Brock, Mayor Pete. Cameron Hoop, Tom Steyer.
Okay, thank you. We do this because Jim and I have met with Dave, you're all the campaign. Yeah, offered one and offered a briefing. And this is an effort to be very transparent. This is not about trying to help one campaign over another. It's to help the campaigns because as they bring voters into our Democratic column, it helps all of us. And so we welcome the campaigns coming in, their participation in our Rules and Bylaws Committee. So Jim and I have encouraged the campaigns to be engaged in this process and let us know what they're hearing on the ground as we review the plans. And we are absolutely tickled pink that you're here today. Jim?
Thank you very much, Lorraine. We have a lot of business today, so let's get started. First, we will consider the challenge to the Alabama delegate selection plan. The materials related to this portion of our work can be found in the folder at your seats. As we noted at our meeting on July 30, a challenge was filed to the delegate selection plan of the Alabama Democratic Party. In accordance with Regulation 3, a challenge to a plan falls under the jurisdiction of this Rules and Bylaws Committee. There are some items that require guidance from the RBC, and Lorraine and I spent time with Chair Worley and others from the state party to go over these items before our last meeting. Again this morning, I spent time along with our staff with Chair Worley and counsel for the party to go over these items.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Where is that in the
Iris Martinez.
Yeah. Where's that in the book?
Pardon me?
Alabama. We're talking about Alabama. Where's that in the book? It says in the book, but we don't know what.
Okay, sorry. I didn't check the book. It is not in the book. It was emailed out to all members of the committee. You are absolutely correct in paying attention. Okay. All right. So I would like to ask at this time, the challenging party, Ralph Young, to address the Rules and Bylaws Committee. I will point out that in getting this room reset from the lengthy resolution committee meeting, we don't have a witness table here. So we are going to provide a microphone to first Mr. Young as the challenging party.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Ralph Young. I'm from Alabama, and sorry, can you hear me there now? Sorry.
We can hear you. If you're comfortable and able to do it, I'm going to ask you to stand so that people kind of know where the voice is coming from.
Excellent. Okay. Hi. I'm Ralph Young. I'm the challenger from Alabama. We have a large class. Mr. Rucko is also a representative for the group. I brought this challenge because there are still substantial irregularities in the voting behaviors of our state party and with the makeup of our Democratic Party, in that minorities are getting short shrift, to quote the findings of the Credentials Committee. Those continue to be issues in our state, and I would like to pass the microphone over to my co-counsel to further discuss those.
Good afternoon. My name is Richard Rocco, and I'm here representing several of the challenging parties in the challenge that you have before you. I'd like to thank Madam Chairwoman, Mr. Chairman, and committee members for giving us an opportunity to make a presentation on the challenge that was filed against the Alabama Democratic Party's delegate selection. The challenge raises several deficiencies. It has 8 counts to it. Deficiencies in both process and substance to the actual vote. Because of the limited time that we have, I'd like to focus on 3 specific areas. The conduct of the vote for the plan, which occurred on July 15th. The underrepresentation of minorities, and frankly, the lack of a meaningful affirmative action plan in order to increase the diversity and inclusiveness of the delegation, and the ADP's noncompliance with the DNC charter and DNC orders, the consequence of which, evidently today, early this morning, resulted in the decredentialing of the chair and vice chair of the Alabama Democratic Party. Now, the conduct of the vote, this is laid out in the challenge in some of the materials that we've also submitted. But the vote, there was a vote that was taken by email on July 15th. On the Friday before, July 12th, at approximately 9 p.m., Ms. Worley, the chair of the Alabama Democratic Party, sent an email to members of the State Democratic Executive Committee. This is a 250-member body, asking them to vote on the delegate selection plan by emailing or faxing a ballot to the ADP by noon, July 15th, following voting. The delegate selection plan was not attached to this email, but instead they were told that it could be accessible on the website, on the ADP's website. When folks tried to access that website, they learned that it wasn't functional. So a second email had to go out on July 13th, informing the SDEC members that there was an updated link. Late evening, July 15th, Ms. Worley certified to the DNC that Alabama's delegate selection plan had been approved by the SDEC. We later learned that there were 131 ballots cast out of the 250 eligible voters, and that the vote total was 62 yes votes, 42 no votes, and 27 votes that were not counted. They were disqualified primarily because the ballots were not signed. We also know that the July 15th vote was marred with so many irregularities that it actually altered the outcome. First, we know, and some of this material is in the material that's been handed out. There was a spreadsheet that was made available and was submitted to the OPA and to the committee that outlines the breakdown of all the votes. If you look at that, what I'm recounting here is reflected in that spreadsheet. But first, we know after examining the ballots that 18 of the 62 yes votes were cast well after the noon deadline. In one instance, a vote was cast on July 16th, early morning of July 16th. Now, ordinarily, extending the deadline under these circumstances would not be controversial, but the problem here was that it was done in an ad hoc and selective way. The deadline, the noon deadline that was set for Monday, was waived sort of on an ad hoc basis. Ms. Worley did not send an email to SDEC members explaining that the noon deadline was being extended. Instead, after the noon July 15th deadline had passed, the leadership, and this is again in the materials that we've submitted, the leadership started calling and reaching out to certain SDEC members, asking them if they were going to vote, selectively canvassing votes after the deadline. And not surprisingly, these 18 SDEC members that were reached out to, they all happen to be yes voters. Because the deadline was waived on a selective and secret basis, and Ms. Worley and Dr. Reed were soliciting these yes votes after the deadline, all 18 yes votes cast after the noon deadline should not have been counted. It should not be considered. Second, we know that several individuals who voted no did not have their ballots counted. For example, and this is again in some of the materials that was provided, Napoleon Bracey, the current state House representative, emailed his ballot by the noon deadline and asked for confirmation of receipt. His ballot is missing. There's been simply no explanation as to how his ballot went missing. He was a no vote. Patricia Todd, another former state House representative, emailed her ballot before the noon deadline, and it is also missing. Both are prominent members of the SDEC, both voted no, and both have a history of questioning the AGP's leadership. If we exclude the 18 votes received after the deadline and count these 2 no votes, the delegate selection plan before this committee was not approved as required under Rule 21. In fact, it's reasonable to conclude that at the July 15th noon deadline, the majority of the members voted and who had submitted their ballots on time had actually rejected the delegate selection plan. So how do you avoid this outcome if you know at noon July 15th you're losing, your ballots go missing, you start calling people you know are going to vote yes, and you allow them to vote after the deadline. Lastly, and perhaps equally disturbing, is that we know that many of the SDEC members eligible to vote did not even receive an email ballot. Ms. Worley has conceded, and this is in the material that's been submitted to this committee, that the ADP does not have, and ADP, I mean, it's the Alabama Democratic Party, does not have email addresses for 27 of the 250 SDEC members. The number may actually be greater than 27 because we've asked for multiple times to show us, we've asked the party to give us access to the actual email distribution list that was used, and they've refused to do that. Now, how do you conduct a vote knowing that you don't, how do you conduct a vote by email knowing that you don't have the email addresses for 10% of the SDEC? The only reason you would do that is that you really don't care about conducting a fair and impartial vote and believe that no one will ever know the difference because there's no transparency. So because of the missing 27 email addresses, are outcome determinative. The RBC should find that the delegate selection plan submitted by Ms. Worley on July 15th was not approved by the SDEC as required under the rules. Now, you may have received word or notice that there was a rerun election. Right? Not admitting that they did anything wrong, not conceding that anything was done wrong. There was a rerun election that was done, actually it was Tuesday of this week, right before this committee met. Now, the problem with the email with this rerun vote, again, it showed that there, I believe, was 97 votes cast for and 70 votes cast against. I mean, that's an enormous number of votes cast against a delegate selection plan. But there were 70 votes of SDEC members who did not believe in that SDEC plan. Now, the problem with accepting these results is, first of all, it's not before this committee at the time we went. The only reason they reran this vote is because they realized that they were caught in how they manipulated the prior vote on July 15th. But aside from that, the email distribution list still lacks 27 addresses. That's never been corrected. And they haven't come to us and said how that's been corrected. And that, again, is an outcome determinative number of votes. So until they actually fix the email address, make sure that they have an email address for every SDEC member, I don't think they should be, conducting votes of this nature by email. Another problem that shows sort of the haphazard way that this was done is that the plan made available for review on the second vote is the wrong plan. What they looked to was the plan as it was drafted and then sent out for 30-day comments. The plan that was linked to in the second vote is the draft plan. It is not the plan that was submitted to the RBC the first time around, which had all the comments, and according to the party, had made some amendments that, based on the comments, the plan had been somewhat amended. So the members that were voting this Tuesday or Monday and Tuesday this weekend were voting on the draft plan that's never been submitted. Again, we have what we know is that the ADP also sent out a memo this weekend, only to select members, reminding them that they needed to vote in this upcoming, the vote that closed on Tuesday at 5 o'clock. It was not sent. That reminder was not sent to all SDEC members. It was only sent to a group of SDEC members. Now, the second issue has to deal with underrepresentation of diversity groups. The delegate selection plan, in particular, underrepresents Hispanics and also makes no meaningful commitment to recruiting other diversity constituencies. With respect to the Latino representation on the Alabama delegation, the plan only commits to recruiting and appointing one Hispanic member. This is based on the assumption that Latinos make up less than 1% of the Democratic electorate in Alabama, an assumption which is just flatly wrong if you use the numbers that they use. If we use their formula, and I think there's some dispute about what the appropriate formula should be, but if we use the ADP's formula, you would end up having a commitment to at least 3 Latino delegates in this particular delegate selection. But even, and now, this may seem like the change from 1 to 3 may seem insignificant, but I can tell you that for many Latinos in Alabama, it's important. Rather than just being the sole Latino on the committee, having someone else that has your experiences on that committee with you is an important aspect or important fact. Now, finally, the ADP's affirmative action plan fails to make meaningful steps towards broadening the party and making it more inclusive. The challenge at Count 4 states that the ADP's affirmative action plan, a required and vital element, is inadequate. Rather than addressing the point about the inadequacies of the affirmative action plan, the ADP's answer focuses solely on attacking the calculation that we used in order to increase representation of Hispanics and other diversity groups on the Alabama's delegation. The ADP does not respond to the claim that the affirmative action plan has no goals or timetables for implementing specific affirmative action programs to increase diversity and make the party more inclusive. Finally, there's the ADP's non-compliance with the DNC charter and DNC board. The ADP has not corrected the problems identified with respect to the elections of Mr. Worley and Reverend Kelly in August of 2018. The bylaws as they exist today are still not compliant with the DNC charter and a ruling of the RBC. In fact, earlier this morning, there was the Credentials Committee met, and there was an exhaustive explanation of all the efforts that this committee has made to try to get Alabama to accept bylaw changes that would make Alabama's bylaws compliant, that would help Alabama have have an SDDC that's more representative of the Democratic electorate. And to no avail, the party simply has not made any effort to do that. In fact, what we've experienced and what was laid out was sort of a history of stalling and a history of avoiding the issue. Now, instead of acknowledging and committing to a more transparent and diverse party, some of the leadership have attacked the DNC with accusations of racism and wanting to disenfranchise black voters. They have called Senator Jones a Dixiecrat and worse. They know full well what it is when they make those accusations. As a result, in fact, the kinds of allegations that have been made out there are allegations that are currently being seized by our opponents, the Republicans. And they're using that to undermine Senator Jones' long and well-known record of fighting for racial equality and social justice. Because the ADP is not compliant with the DNC charter and rules, and there's a lack of will on the part of the leadership to address this failure, the selection of pledged, at-large, and alternate delegates should not be entrusted to the ADP, but instead a quorum of district-level delegates should be the ones selecting these delegates. We also believe that by rejecting this plan, it will force the ADP to have a meeting of the SDDC, which they have not called, so that we can take up these issues, these very important and vital questions. Thank you for the time to make this, allow me to make this presentation. If there are any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. The challengers have presented for 15 and a half minutes, just for the record. Let me just point out for the members of the committee that if you have iPads or mobile phones, the delegate selection plan challenge materials for Alabama were re-forwarded to you at 2:15, and the email from counsel for the Alabama Democratic Party was emailed to you at 2:20. If you want to make reference to those materials and don't have them with you. So I appreciate the testimony that we have received, and now we are joined by Chairwoman Nancy Worley, who we would like to invite to address the Rules and Bylaws Committee. I see that Chairwoman Worley is yielding her time to
Ben Maximuck, MAXY-WK, Council for the Alabama Democratic Party. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Please speak up just a little bit, Ben.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Ms. Chairwoman, members of the committee, for your time allowing me to address the committee. Do feel a little bit like a lounge act standing up here. Now, like my friend Richard, some aspects of the challenge I'm going to rest on our briefs because of the brief time that's allowed to us. I'm going to try to respond to the ones that I think will be most helped by some oral explanation. Richard talked a good deal about the alleged procedural irregularities, and he's He's correct that we haven't conceded anything on that point. But I would like to talk about what we elected to do after filing our answer and evaluating the situation we're in. We are especially sensitive to timelines in Alabama because we are under a court order which requires us to close our qualifying 116 days before the election in March for delegates. And that's due to a lawsuit that had to do with overseas Democrats and military and making sure they have time to get their absentee ballots. So we need to close our qualifying on November 8th, which is why the plan was to open it on September 27th. Taking that into account and taking into account the allegations that have been made about the procedures in this first vote, which I should also mention, were driven by the concern over the timeline and the need to have an approved plan in time for this committee's meeting in July. Was one of the reasons for the rush timeline on the initial vote. Taking all that into account, we decided that the better course would be to remove any doubt about whether the Alabama Democratic Party and the SDEC in fact approved the plan by having a second vote that addressed some of the allegations at a longer time period. This vote opened late on Thursday last. It was open all day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. Closed at 5 p.m. on Tuesday. It was the deadline that was distributed to all members. I was personally there to verify that no ballots were accepted after 5 p.m. on Tuesday. The ballot was distributed by email using the list that we have, which we have acknowledged. Some members do not use email or not provide an email address. Those 27 members all received a ballot by mail, and the U.S. mail, and they were all called to make sure that they knew the ballot was coming in the mail. We received ballots from many of them. Each ballot, as it came in during this period, was stamped, date stamped, set aside until the counting on Tuesday. We had a couple come in unmarked or unsigned. We called people who did that to make sure they knew they had till 5 p.m. to rectify it. We told everybody anybody whose vote ballot was not signed, or and we ended up with only two unaccepted ballots at the end. So I was there on Tuesday with the staff. We invited Mr. Young, Mr. Rocco to send representatives. They sent Mr. Young and another SDEC member to observe. We counted the ballots. They observed every moment of it, verified the ballots were received, that they were legal, whether they were yes or no. We counted a tally of 97, as Richard said, 97 in favor of approving the plan and 70 against, which is well above the quorum. We have 250 members and a 40% quorum requirement, so that's 100 for a quorum. So, having said all that, and I say all that just because I hope it will put this committee's minds at ease in terms of whether the SDEC as a body it approves this plan, whether a majority of the SDEC is in favor of the plan. And we think that this confirms that that's the case. We would hope that, given how sensitive the time situation is here, that the committee would choose not to elevate in some way form over substance by sustaining a procedural challenge when we have demonstrated that the substantive approval does exist. As to the minority representation question, our plan, as we've submitted in our briefs, our plan is based on data from the Secretary of State's office, which maintains data on ethnicity. And we think that the relevant question has to do with the percentage of registered voters in the Democratic electorate. The data you get from the Secretary of State is registered voters. It shows 0.96% Hispanic. That's what they told us, and that's the number we used. So Rocco has submitted some other materials which are from the Census Bureau. They're not the decennial census. We've noted in our briefs that they they state that they are not, and are not reliable in that way. They're based on surveys. And so we believe that we have complied. We believe we would submit it's not true that there are not goals and timelines. I think I would just refer you to our plan. There are goals, there are timelines, and the specific goals are based on the statistics we've submitted from our Secretary of State's office. Again, I'm going to rest mostly on a brief in the count that discussed illegal votes on the 35 members that we have elected at large to our committee as a affirmative action provision to ensure full representation of African Americans. They've claimed that those members' status is somehow in doubt due to the Credentials Committee separate matter or related matter that we've been dealing with. The Credentials Committee never said anything about those 35. There was some discussion at the hearing. They never said anything about their status. They're members of the SDEC, just like any other member. They voted properly in this election. As for the party's compliance with the rules, we understand what happened this morning. We understand you all have been here. We've been before you on that other issue about the bylaws. We don't think, excuse me, since I don't have a table to shuffle papers, I need to find a piece of paper. We don't think that our party, we do think that our party, we don't think it is incompliant, we think it is compliant with Regulation 10B. This has to do with the state executive committee selecting the PLEOs and the at-large members. The requirements are that the membership is apportioned on the basis of population and or some measure of democratic strength. That's exactly what we do. Our 210 members are based on the House legislative districts, which is a measure of population, and our at-large members are added in order to take account of a measure of democratic strength. They were elected, those members, there's some question about the election of 2 of our officers. Our other members were elected through open processes in conformity with the basic procedural guarantees. And they were elected, the delegates will be elected at public meetings. So we think that despite these separate questions about the status of the party's bylaws and the chair and vice chair, that there's no justification to hold that the SDEC as a body does not comply with Rule 10B. And we don't think that this committee, I would emphasize the standard of review here as well. It's clear and convincing standard. It's not a predominance, it's not more likely than not. We need to be absolutely convinced to a clear and convincing degree that our plan is not compliant or that there's merit to the challenge before you grant it. And that's very important to keep that in mind. For all those reasons, I'm happy to answer your questions as a committee, but we would ask that you would dismiss the challenge and allow us to go forward through the normal committee process to approval. And we hope that can happen as soon as it possibly can, because we are really anxious to get the process started and get those presidential candidates, gathering signatures and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Maxwell. I have a question for you, and I'll put the same question to the challenger. As you know, the Credentials Committee earlier this afternoon acted on its previous determination that if there were not approved bylaws in place for the party, the credentials of the state chair and vice chair would be declared invalid. Now, that's an action of the Credentials Committee. It now goes to the full DNC for Saturday's meeting. So that's where it stands right now, is that the Credentials Committee declared those credentials invalid. Do you think that that action, either the preliminary action taken earlier or the final recommendation today, has an effect, and if so, what be on this challenge?
No, I don't think we should allow that ongoing process to stand in the way of adopting and approving this plan so that we can move forward with the presidential candidates, with the delegates, and qualifying. I do not. I think that affects Chair Corley and First Vice Chair Kelly's ability to participate in deliberations at the DNC, or potentially, if it's approved by full body on Saturday, to vote here and do other things in terms of the responsibilities to the DNC. What they have, by submitting the plan, they've done that under their responsibilities as part of the state party. The state party has submitted the plan, although they were the instrument.
And I'll ask the challengers if they would comment on that as well.
Hello, Ralph Young again. The question before you now is, do you trust the Alabama Democratic Party to execute the delegate selection process in a fair manner? We continue to have issues with this process, and that's going to continue until we fix the party. To do that, we have to call a new meeting, we have to get new bylaws, we have to get new officers. This has to be fixed. Now is the time to do it, not later.
This is Richard Rocco, Mr. Chairman. The answer to your question as to whether it should have an impact, what happened earlier today at the Credentials Committee, I think at a minimum, it certainly impacts whether the state committee, I mean, you have to understand, I think, the background for the Credential Committee's actions. Part of their concern about the bylaws, and this all came out when we had a hearing back in February, is that the bylaws are drafted in such a way that they prevent the party from meeting the full participation requirement of Article 8 of the DNC Charter. And that is what costs, I mean, that in addition to some, irregularities in how the vote was actually conducted for the chair and vice chair. It's that fundamental concern that the body is not constituted in a way that's consistent with Article 8 that has led the Credentials Committee, in my opinion, to take the actions that they've taken. So without the SDEC, that body, which would be the body that would be selecting delegates from the proposed plan, without that body being reconstituted in a way that's consistent with the full participation requirement, then I don't see how we can allow the SDEC to do the delegate selection, particularly the at-large, the PLEO delegates, and the alternates. What we propose is that, at a minimum, the plan should say that it's the district level delegates should convene after they're elected, and once there's a quorum, allow that body to make the decisions as to who the PLEO and the at-large and alternates are going to be.
Thank you. It's both the challenger and counsel for the challenger spoke. I'm going to ask if you want to rebut that on.
Yeah, I have just a minute. My client is sitting with some distance. Just to
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair Willie.
In this little sidebar over here, I took the model plan and pretty much followed it with the Alabama legal requirements that had to go in it and the new issues. Right now, after our March primary on March 3rd, then we elect at that primary our district level delegates. Then in April, we come together with those delegates and we actually vote on PLEOs we vote after they've been elected, then we go back and have another round of balloting for at-large. Then we have another round of balloting for the alternates. Then following that, there's a business meeting in the afternoon that elects committee members and that. So we have that process in order that I believe almost everybody uses that has a primary system.
Thank you very much, Chair Worley.
I apologize, but usually lawyers can just lean over and whisper.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. We understand that.
I think what I would take away from that is that we don't necessarily object to the remedies. That one remedy that Richard just described as to the delegates, the elected delegates as a committee.
Can you specify which remedy you mean?
Richard,
Let
me make sure I know what he said before
Yeah,
I
the remedy that we request, which is having the district level delegates that are elected after the primary, having them form, if they have a quorum, having that group decide who the at-large, the PLEO delegates would be, and the alternates. And frankly, if that were done, if they would agree to modify their plan in such a way, then that, to some extent, may resolve some of the issues that the Credentials Committee has raised, right? Because it's no longer the SDEC body, which is what they had concerns about, how that body was constituted. It's no longer that body that will be making the decisions for who the at-large, the PLEO delegates are. Rather, it's the district level delegates, after they're elected, they will convene a meeting and then elect the remaining at-large members.
So, Mr. Maxman, was that an accurate description of what the state party is prepared to accept as a modification?
I can't whisper it. Nancy, I believe that's what I just heard you say was that.
Over there with the microphone. Hold on, because we can't hear you. Sure.
Right now, the process, the delegates are the ones who elect on a written ballot. Patrice, do you have a copy of the plan?
I think your district level delegates are elected on the government-run primary ballot.
The district delegates are elected in the primary on the government-run.
That's right. So I think the question is, who is the selecting body for your PLEOs and your at-larges? Right now, the plan before us proposes that the state Democratic Executive Committee is the body that elects those delegate positions. And I think what Mr. Rucco is proposing is that another qualified group is a quorum of your district level delegates. And that is what is the question.
So I understand better what you're saying now. Okay, so the SDEC does meet approximately 6 weeks after the primary, after those votes have been certified. And SDEC, the full committee, does elect the PLEOs. Then after that election occurs on a paper ballot, then we have a paper ballot which they elect the at-large, but those delegates then come together by themselves and elect the committee persons and all that.
So I would point out that if a modification, I want to make sure that I have the state party representatives' attention so they can understand what I'm putting before the committee. Mr. Maxman. Okay.
Sorry, but sure. I'll submit to the committee.
Okay, so if a modification is being accepted in the plan, it would have to be re-adopted by the state committee. So I want everyone to understand that if that is what is transpiring here today, whether or not it cures everything in your challenge or not, it would have to be re-adopted by the state committee. So at this point, I think we've had the issue fully put before us. And I want to ask if someone would like to make a motion either to approve the plan, or to reject the plan, or to postpone consideration of the plan. Does anyone want to make a motion for any of those things? Mr. Ickes.
Well, I have a procedural question first. If a motion is made and seconded, will it then be open to discussion and questions?
Yes.
So I'm happy to make a motion. What are the three alternatives, Jim?
Approve the plan, reject the plan, and that is to say find it in non-compliance. And when I say approve the plan, as with most plans, that would probably be conditional compliance if it was approved. There are almost always technical issues to be resolved. So approve the plan with conditional compliance, reject the plan as not in compliance, or postpone consideration of the plan.
I'll let somebody else make the motion. I have a real, and I'll talk about this later. I don't think this state party is constituted, is legally able to administer the plan. And I'll raise that later.
So state again. State again. Therefore, you're making a motion? No, you're not. I got it. But I'm willing to.
I'll make a motion that we ought to postpone the plan.
All right. Now, a motion has been made to postpone consideration of the plan. Mr. Spake has asked to speak. Also, Mr. McDonald and Mr. McDonald. Let me say that before we take the vote, this is sort of an unusual order, but this is an unusual thing we're dealing with. We will have to vote whether to accept or reject the challenge to the plan. So we have a motion on the floor to postpone the plan. If we're just postponing it, we'll postpone action on the challenge as well. If that fails, and the motion is to approve, we would have to deal with the challenge first. Is there a second to Mr. Ickes' motion? Mr. Goodman made that second. Okay, discussion. All right, Mr. McDonald.
I'm not debating, I'm just trying to figure out where we are. A motion to postpone would seem to assume that we have a plan in front of us that has been submitted by the party, and as I understand the challenge is that no plan has been validly adopted by the party. So, and it is a bit confusing to me because it seems to me from your description, if we were to decide that a plan has been adopted but has defects, then we might decide to conditionally approve it. But if we were to decide that they have not adopted it at all, we don't know what plan we would be reviewing.
So would you like to make a substitute motion to approve to accept the challenge?
No, what I would like to do, if I have not preempted somebody else's motion because Mr. Spade, I think, is ahead of me in line, but what I would like to do when I properly have the floor is to move to accept the plan as having been adopted for reasons that I'm happy to go into, but not to, until I've at least heard a staff evaluation, accept it for any kind of approval status. And I will indicate that I personally would not vote to approve the use of the SDDC to select at-large delegates because I think it violates Rule 10B, but that doesn't mean that the rest of the plan is involved.
I understand where you're going, but we're not there yet.
I understand. I'll give you a roadmap.
Mr. Spade.
Well, Harold's motion is on the floor, valid motion on the floor and been seconded, but I would ask if you consider withdrawing it for an acceptance motion of the challenge. I could also make that as a dual motion.
You could make that as a substitute motion. But I'll ask Mr. Hickey if he wants to withdraw his motion.
Well, before I withdraw, I want to find out what you're going to do, so.
I'd like to accept the challenge and actually do a dual motion and reject the plan altogether.
If you accept the challenge, that rejects the plan. So that's one motion that encompasses all of that.
And that is my motion.
That's what his motion is.
And to explain why, I agree with what Mr. McDonald just said. I think the fact that the SDC is ill constituted and this body voted on their bylaws at our last meeting, which is what precipitated the credentials challenge. The plan.
No, the challenge is already in place.
Well, but it helped with that, no doubt. The plan was approved by an SDC that has faulty bylaws, and the plan was approved under faulty bylaws. So that's the reason why I think we ought to accept the challenge and therefore reject it.
Mr. Hickey.
Well, before maybe conceding, it is my understanding, based on the papers from the challenge parties, I was about to say defendants, the challenge parties, that the OPA gave them consent to operate under the existing bylaws. And I want that's what I read in your papers. And I just want to understand whether what you have what I think you have in your papers is correct, because that puts a different twist on what you're talking about.
I don't have it right at hand, but that was my understanding. We were told to go ahead. I don't.
But let me just. Here's the question. Forget what's in his papers, which you can't find. I think I have it, but my understanding is that the state party's position is that they went ahead with the approval process of their delegate selection plan under their current bylaws, and that was signed off on by the DNC staff. The only reason I'm asking the question is because it does come into play with your proposed motion, which I'm in sympathy about, but I want to understand what the...
So let me just clarify. You are not withdrawing your motion, Mr. Hickey.
No, Mr. Chairman. Right now, I'm not until I get an answer as to whether or not the state party was told by the DNC staff that they could get the approval for their delegate selection plan under the current bylaws, because the substitute motion, the premise is that the bylaws are defective, which I think they are, but that doesn't go to my first question.
So
I would want to know that answer too.
To answer that question, and I'll ask Patrice to confirm this, my understanding is the staff has not told the state party that their plan will be approved under the current bylaws.
I think the answer to your question, Harold, speaking in my role also as counsel for the Credentials Committee, is that the state party was not informed one way or the other whether they had properly had rules in place that they could adopt the plans under. But I think significantly, the Credentials Committee, over the course of the summer, said that the chair and vice chair would be temporarily seated so explicitly so that they could continue to engage in party business and conduct
their activities. Now, that's changed as of today, but over the course of the summer when the plan was adopted and everything, the intent of the Credentials Committee was to leave the chair and vice chair in place so that the party could continue to take action while this whole process.
So, Graham, that was not a statement about the bylaws. That was a statement about the role of the state party officers.
That's right, and I believe that there was no statement either way specifically about the bylaws.
Rebecca Higgins, did you have
So the motion on the floor is to postpone right now, right?
That is the motion on the floor at the moment, but Mr. Spade.
Well, right now, so right now it's to postpone.
Right now it's to postpone.
And send it back to Alabama, is that what you're saying, Mr. Chairman? And have them.
Postponing it is an opportunity for the state party and the challengers to deal with the
Right.
opportunities for changing the plan that they discussed here today. I'm going to call Mr. Fowler first, and then I'm going to call.
I still have something I want to say. I just wanted to get clear what the motion was. So I'm speaking against the motion. I have hearing everything that's been going on that we've read and dealt with in the last 6 to 9 months or however long it's been, and hearing the last and reading the last the challenge. I don't feel that sending it back to Alabama is going to change anything. I do not think that they are capable at this time of coming back with anything that's going to be any different. It's clear to me, and as somebody who is new to this process and new to this, I do not know the history behind what's going on in Alabama. I am, neutral as far as that. I'm just looking at keeping the process clean.
Thank you.
And that means that we have to have integrity in our process. When we talk about transparency, our members need to know that we are not letting any suspect behavior happen. So I am saying I'm against postponing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fowler, then Mr. Hickey, and then I'm going to go to the representative of the state
Mr. Chairman, if we defeat this motion to postpone, that means we will go ahead and consider the motion on its merits at this meeting right now. That's a question.
If we defeat the motion to postpone, it would then be appropriate for someone to make a motion either to accept the challenge or reject the challenge. That would be the next vote.
Well, I just want to make sure that adopting the movement to postpone will not preclude us from taking other action on this question today.
Adopting the motion to postpone would end action for today, yes.
You mean we could not go ahead and consider the proposal on the merits today?
No, that's correct. If we postpone, we cannot.
If we do postpone, we can go ahead and consider it today, right?
If we postpone, we end discussion for today. If the motion to postpone is defeated, then we'll go back to the merits of the challenge and the plan itself.
I don't have a motion to make in that case. Thank you.
But you may later. Mr.
Maxim.
Okay, so Mr. Maxim, would you speak first, and then I have Mr. McDonald, Mr. Spade, and Ms. Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To answer Mr. Hickey's question, I apologize for not having my finger on my papers. I did anticipate my own defense having a table.
I'm sorry about that.
I agree with what Graham said with regard to which bylaws we're operating under for the purpose of submitting a plan. I think that I would only add that we were repeatedly in contact about submitting the plan, instructed how to submit the plan. And we don't have any new bylaws, so the only bylaws that could possibly be done under to adopt and submit the plan would have been our old bylaws. So we took it to a minimum be implicit that we were adopting and submitting the plan under our existing bylaws while we're in the pending process of approving new bylaws.
Understand. All right, Mr. McDonald.
Returning to my question from before, to me, if we postpone, if we decide to postpone, we are saying we have a plan and we are postponing its consideration and we have disposed of the challenge. I'm not necessarily opposed to doing that for the following reasons, but I do want to be clear.
I'm going to differ with you on that. I'm going to say that it is not dispositive of the challenge. Because by postponing, we defer all action with regard to this.
And let me, I do have this debate, but let me restate as a point of information. Do I understand that this is a motion to postpone consideration of the challenge and the plan as opposed to a motion?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Now we're in agreement. Now, with respect to that, I think we can decide some of the basic issue about whether we have a plan in front of us today. We have, the only requirement we have in our rules is that the state party adopt a plan. I don't think we specify how they do it. I don't specify anything other, that we do anything other than say they have to adopt a plan and submit it to us, and then we will review the plan and decide whether there is a problem. I think the Credentials Committee clearly intended in their original decision that the party keep operating. They did not intend to create a decision in which every action of the state party for the next year was potentially invalid because of their decision with respect to the state chairs. I think to the extent that there were irregularities in the issuance of the initial ballots, that was ratified. That whatever decision was made appears to have been ratified by a second ballot. With respect to the members of the SDPC who are impliedly under challenge, and it is only impliedly under challenge. There has been no move, nor do I think we have the authority at the DNC necessarily to remove them from their positions in the state party. What our authority is to not allow them to vote on the election of the chair and vice chair and so on. And so I think we're going down this road, if we're not careful, where we're saying we've got this whole challenge issue that we've got to revisit in 2 or 3 months whenever we can next get together and the parties can next file another 46 megabytes of briefs that were submitted to us in about 24 hours. So why don't we kind of just get to it? People are talking about having problems with the plan, right? Which we're not even getting to. But most people are saying, I don't want to approve this plan. There's a problem with 10B. There's a problem with the election. Why don't we just deal with the plan and not deal with the challenge that is not going to move us down the road? So I would oppose this motion. And then if it is defeated, come back to a motion with respect to the plan itself and at least indicate the defects that we know exist and explain how we're going to get something before us that can be approved in time for an election.
I understand where you're going there. I would say we might have to act on the challenge before we get to acting on the plan itself. Mr. Spade.
That's exactly what I wanted to sort of classify it as a dual motion. Accept the challenge, reject the plan. If you do it, just by accepting the challenge, we reject the plan, that's fine with me. But I think we're still at the point where we're relying on what Harold would like to do with this motion.
Ms. Sullivan?
I'm a little confused now. No matter what we do, whether we vote to postpone or vote to reject, what body or what individuals in the Alabama State Democratic Party have the authority to fix it? Who gets to fix this? Who has the authority to do that as the legal representatives of the Alabama State Committee? And so if I could, and then I have a follow-up to that, but first I just don't understand who that is no matter what we do today.
So let me state where I think that stands, and I will ask counsel to speak up if he has a different view of this. I think, as was just laid out in some of the previous discussion, the Credentials Committee has determined, and for the sake of this argument, let's assume that the Credentials Committee action is confirmed by the full DNC. So they will have determined that the chair and vice chair were not properly selected because there were not proper bylaws. However, the situation within Alabama is that there is a state executive committee that is operating under bylaws that the DNC considers not properly drawn. It is up to this committee, again, in considering the plan and in considering the challenge, to determine whether that body has the authority to adopt a plan for our consideration. That's my reading of it. I think that's Mr. Spade's reading. I'm going to ask Mr. Wilson if he agrees with that.
I think that that's right. I think it is our rules say that the state party shall adopt a delegate selection committee without elaborating on what we would consider, what the immediate steps necessary, how that's done, other than the 30-day publication requirement. So I think it is to this committee in order to decide what constitutes a qualifying adoption of the state plan. I don't think necessarily that the fact that there is a chair and vice chair whose credentials have been maybe ruled invalid by the DNC tomorrow necessarily answers that question.
But necessarily, I agree with. But in fact, the grounds for that decision with regard to those credentials is that the bylaws of the state party do not conform to the charter of the DNC. That is a factor I think this committee can take into account in deciding on the challenge and the plan itself.
I absolutely agree with that. I think it's fully within this committee's discretion to say, if you're asking has the plan been adopted by the state party, that's one of the issues in the challenge. And I think it's absolutely within this committee's purview to say, we're not going to say it has not been validly adopted by the state party because we don't believe that the state party action was valid given these issues. I think that's something you can decide.
Great.
Can I follow up on that then?
Marie, who was that? I'm sorry. Oh, Kathy? Yeah.
Yeah, if I just spoke then. So, this is a fine pickle we find ourselves in. Alabama needs, I'm not sure I'm going to vote on postponement, except that Alabama needs a plan. Alabama needs to elect delegates. And the time is getting short for them to have a plan and to have delegates at our national convention. So, where do we go from here if it's postponed? Where do we go from here if the challenge is accepted? And what's the time frame on this? And when will we, I guess we'll meet again at some point to approve either a fixed plan, I mean, who's in charge?
Or reject a not fixed plan.
Right, but I guess I'm saying I need a roadmap either way as to what happens depending on how we vote today.
So if we were to vote, if the postponement were to be approved, we would await the resubmission of a plan. The challenge would not have been acted on. So we would wait for the resubmission of a plan, and we would see at that time whether the challenge is still relevant. Yes. Yes. We could set a date, a deadline for resubmission of the plan since time is of the essence. That's right. Especially because all of the previous deadlines have passed.
Okay, I just have one last question following up on that then. So if they have to submit a new plan, do they have to go through the 30-day notification and public comment again?
If it is a substantive change in the plan, yes, I think they have to go through the 30 days. If it is a technical change, no, but I think they are probably talking a substantive change. Mr. Leo.
Thank you. This pains me, but I'd like to move a substitute motion to reject the challenge and refer the plan to the RBC staff for consideration and a recommendation to this committee. It pains me because this Alabama situation has taken up so much time, especially of Harold and Yvette, of the chairs of this committee, the chairs of Credentials Committee, of the members of this committee, of the members of Credentials Committee, of the hearing officer, and especially of our staff. And I just watched 2 hours of the Credentials Committee where basically the DNC told Alabama that your bylaws are not in compliance with the DNC rules, and Alabama's response seemed to be, we don't care. And that just, look, you had a disagreement, you lost, the DNC interpreted your rules, it's up to you to comply with the DNC rules. In terms of the delegate selection plan, though, we've got a whole lot of people in Alabama on March 3rd who would like to vote in a primary. If this were a convention process, I might think differently, but basically, most of this plan is your basic primary kind of thing. And so, regardless of the bad faith of the leadership of the Alabama Democratic Party, the plan can still be put in effect. Candidates can be heard, voters can vote. The 2 issues that are concerned, one is the affirmative action goals, but that's something that the staff can recommend changes on. We do that at every meeting, so that's fine. And the other is the election of the at-large members, and there is two vacancies for each position for the PLEOs and the at-large. And yeah, I don't think we do trust the Alabama Democratic Committee to make that decision. And there was an alternative that was suggested, and I would hope the Rules and Bylaws staff would pursue that with Alabama as well. So there are a lot of problems there, but I'm just not sure that postponing this at the time that presidential candidates need to file, and telling Alabama voters that they don't, they can't participate in a primary, ultimately because their state party can't get its act together, that just doesn't seem right to me. So I would make a substitute motion that we reject the challenge, that we refer the plan to itself to the Rules and Bylaws Committee staff for recommendation, whether it's conditional acceptance, rejection, whatever, it'll be in their court now, as any other state plan would be. And that we move on to the other 13 states and all the rest of the business we have to do.
So you put a substitute motion on the floor, which would require rejecting the challenge and instructing staff to prepare their normal analysis of the plan. Is there a second for that substitute motion?
Second.
There is a second. So that is now open for discussion. That is now open for discussion by members of the committee. The next person who had their hand raised is Chairman Fowler. Do you want to discuss this substitute motion, Mr. Fowler?
I think we need to reject the postponement. I think we need to deal with this now. We've dealt with Alabama for at least 2 centuries, and we need to move on. I would like to incorporate in the motion the thought that this committee consider at least the possibility of rejecting the Alabama proposal now and develop an alternative way to provide Alabama with an acceptable delegate selection plan.
So let me say that you would like to, your motion would be to reject the plan now.
My motion would be to reject the postponement, the same as Frank.
Yes.
I would second that motion.
Okay. All right.
But I think we should move beyond that and deal substantively with the matter that's before us.
Okay. All right. However, Frank's motion goes farther. He rejects the challenge, and he refers the plan to the staff for evaluation. Do you want to refer the plan to the staff for evaluation, or do you want to act on it today?
I want to act on it. I want to act on it today.
So you don't really want to second this motion?
I want to. No, I don't want to second that part of the motion. I do want to second the part.
There you got it. As you know, you got a second.
All right, Mr. Chairman, can I with Frank, can I withdraw the second part of my motion and just put it on the table to protect the challenge?
So that if you withdraw the second part, then your motion would be to reject the challenge. We then would go back to whether to approve or not approve the plan. That's right.
That's what I would say.
Okay. All right. Mr. Ickes?
Well, just a parliamentary, I gather that a substitute motion trumps my motion in terms of voting?
If it's, yes, it does. Only if it's accepted. If it's not accepted, then we go back to your motion.
And what, so is it now too late for me to withdraw my motion and let Kevin make his? What?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Dennis. I'm sorry.
All right. Is it too late for him to withdraw his motion? Asking the parliamentarian.
It's awfully complicated to do that.
You get paid for it, Ellen.
Yeah, but Occam's razor. Remember, take your action and deal with it. The current motion is to reject the challenge. Okay? In theory, that could be adopted, and then you could decide to postpone something else. Okay? So I would suggest that you don't withdraw too early. You may want to get there and you may not. Why don't we all take some votes and see what people's real opinion is? Because you don't know that yet.
I'll come back to you.
Well, just to follow up on that. Frank, restate your motion, your substitute motion.
Yeah, my current substitute motion is just to reject the challenge. And then after that, we can decide whether or not we want to consider the plan or whether we want to refer the plan to the staff and have them make the recommendations they normally do.
Has there been a second to that?
I think Mr. Chairman Fowler seconded.
Chairman Fowler seconded, yes. Mr. Spade?
That's not to reject the plan.
Well, but Frank's motion is his substitute for his substitute is to reject the challenge.
So then you're withdrawing your second. Is there a second? I'll second. Now Mr. McDonald has seconded Mr. Leo's motion. Mr. Spade, do you have going further, or would you like us to proceed to vote?
Let's just vote.
Thank you. All right. Ms. Higgins, did you have something first, or should we proceed to vote? Ms. Dockery.
I'm so confused. But I want to make sure, by rejecting the challenge, we are saying that the challenge is invalid, that we disagree with the challenge, which, as I understand, was about the way the vote was conducted as well as the content of the plan. That's what the challenge is about. So if I vote for what Frank is saying, I'm saying that I disagree with the challenge.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Since I joined it as a late second, let me both ask, have we ever rejected the submission of a state plan based on the composition of the adopting body? And if we have not, if we accept the challenge on the basis of the composition of the state party body, are we then creating a precedent for any state's plan to be challenged as having been invalidly adopted based on whether the composition of their electing body, for example, has people on it who are not elected by the state committee to be added on, but are elected by third-party groups, which, as I recall from the June meeting, there are several big states that may have executive boards that are set up that way who adopted the plans that we have
reviewed. And that is why I would reject the challenge.
So, without the research, and maybe even with research, I cannot state with a certainty whether we have ever rejected a plan because of the makeup of the adopting body. I will say that in the more than 2 decades that I have been on this committee, I have no recollection of ever doing that, and that may be the best history that we have. And on the second question that you raised, does this establish a precedent? Sure, everything we do establishes a precedent once we've done, if we do it.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, Mr. Goodman.
So I can stop being confused like everyone else. If we take a vote on rejecting the challenge, and that fails, does that mean that we have now accepted the challenge? Because if you don't even take 2 votes. If the challenge, rejecting the challenge is not succeed, then you automatically have adopted the challenge.
And I think in our normal procedure, if you vote to reject the challenge, which is the motion before us, it's over and done. If you defeat the motion to reject the challenge, I think that is accepting the challenge. Yes, thank you. So I have on my list to speak. I hear a good bit of sound to proceed to voting, but I have on my list to speak Mr. Ickes, Mr. Spade, Reverend Daughtry, and Ms. Higgins. Do any of you still want to speak? All right, we'll take you in order. Mr. Ickes?
There's 8 counts to this challenge. Only 1 count, as I understand it, deals with the composition of the party. And so, I guess if that were the only count, I might be persuaded by David. But David, that's not the only count. There's serious allegations. We haven't even started to ask questions of these guys. We just heard their side of the story. But there's serious allegations about certainly about how the first vote was conducted. I mean, that's just a disaster. It sounds like the vote they had on the 11th of August when they elected their officers. But even the second vote, there's questions about the validity of the list that they used. And it seems to me that we should not reject the challenge. I'm all in favor of getting to the heart of the substance of the plan. I don't know how we do that procedurally, but it just seems to me that we're being short-sighted to reject the challenge.
Mr. Spade.
Harold made my point exactly, David, is that it's certainly not the sole basis of the challenge, the bylaws that we have, I think, already deemed effective. And so I don't know what kind of precedent it really sets to accept the challenge.
Reverend Daughtry.
As usual, Harold spoke for me.
Thank you very much for your brevity. Ms. Higgins.
And you cannot often say that.
I am against the motion. As a teacher, when I taught first grade, and even in first grade we had to talk about our country and voting and how precious having the ability to vote here in the United States is. And when I hear about all these violations, clear violations, I am not cavalier about saying you lost, just go on, deal with it. We need to be transparent. If we would reject this challenge, it would be sending the message to every state that you can go and do whatever you want, and because Alabama got away with it, we can get away with it too. I think about elections past. I don't think Al Gore would have said, oh, just deal with it, move on. Votes matter. The process matters. our fellow DNC and the citizens of this country who are looking to us and wanting us to speak are counting on us to have a transparent message that what we do here and their votes matter. Thank you.
Chairman Fowler.
Would you clearly state what motion is on the floor at this point?
Yes. In fact, I will ask the parliamentarian.
The substitute motion was modified essentially without objection from the committee, so that the first vote you will take is on the substitute motion to reject the challenge. Okay? If that motion is not adopted, the chair has ruled you have in essence accepted the challenge. But if you reject the first vote, the substitute motion on the first vote, you still have pending the original motion, which was a motion to postpone consideration of the plan.
So what is the first vote? If we voted right now, what would be the first vote?
The first vote before you would be the Leon motion to reject the challenge.
And to reject the challenge means we approve the plan, is that correct?
No.
The chair has ruled that if you reject the motion to reject the challenge, that you have then adopted the motion to accept the challenge.
If we vote yes to accept the challenge, that means that we have disapproved the plan as it currently stands.
That's right.
So if we defeat the challenge, we reject the proposal that Alabama now has before this body.
If we adopt the motion to reject the challenge and thereby accept the challenge, then the plan is, the challenge is accepted and the plan is disapproved. And that means if that's not the end of it, the plan, is then an opportunity to amend the plan. I hear a point of order over here, Mr. McDonald.
Let me just clarify, as I understand it, what is before us is a motion to substitute for the main motion. And if it passes, it then becomes the main motion. It does not actually reject or accept the challenge. It simply becomes the motion that we are then going to vote on. So that your earlier statement that by voting, rejecting this motion to substitute, we automatically disposed of it is not quite correct. It's still in play. Is that right, Ellen?
You would have a second opportunity to both modify it and discuss it. What I was referring to was the chair's ruling that if you adopt this, the motion to reject, it is the chair's ruling that sub saliento, you have adopted a motion to accept, but you won't have done that, as you correctly point out, until you have voted on this, the second time to adopt the amended main motion.
So, the point of order is well taken. If we adopt the motion to reject the challenge, that is a substitute motion, so we then have to vote on the main motion.
That's right.
The main motion at that point would be to reject the challenge. That's when we would take the action that that either accepts or rejects it. So there are two votes that have to be taken. So the motion at the moment is just to substitute. Ms. Wingard, did you have a further point of order? Or if that's happening?
I think it's getting, I think it's actually getting more confusing.
Yeah.
Not less
I think if we move to some votes, it will get clear.
But I think that from the body here and listening for the last 2 hours, and we may be making, even though I thought that what Frank was doing initially, so this is not a court of order, this is just an argument in the body. May I proceed?
Please.
So I think that, initially what Frank was doing was good intent, bad vehicle. Because as Reverend Daughtry said, that in listening to the challenge, and as my co-teachers, my fellow teachers said, in listening to the challenge, it's clear that almost everyone on the Rules and Bylaws Committee is like, there's something wrong with the Alabama plan. And but by using the vehicle that Frank suggested, it is saying that there's something wrong with the challenge, which essentially there's something wrong with the plan. And the issue becomes, and this is what I don't understand how to do, the issue becomes, how does one actually move quickly enough so that the Democratic voters in Alabama actually can participate in the presidential primary process, and to not have the issues of the process impede that. So I think that the original motion, which was essentially to either to reject the plan, I'm not making a motion, I'm just suggesting things, that the original motion, or the sense of this body is, we want to get to a situation where we are actually directing Alabama to do something right, which essentially means that the staff, that we need to have hold of the plan and then make some changes on that plan so that we can get to the voters of Alabama a plan they can use, notwithstanding whatever the party is doing. And the question I have for the parliamentarian is, how do we do that?
You may recall I said to Mr. Hickey's it was too early to decide to remove his motion.
I followed you, Helen.
So you'll get back to Mr. Hickey's motion by voting no at your first opportunity to vote. And you could further modify Mr. Hickey's motion to postpone by giving it a little more flesh on the bones.
Mr. Chairman, I'm just trying to move things along. I'd be happy to withdraw my motion.
So
I'd just say I would be happy to withdraw my motion if that makes sense for us.
So you are withdrawing your motion, is your seconder agreeing with that?
I endorse Ms. Weingarten's comments, and I would join in withdrawing it, but move it along so we can decide when the voters get to vote.
All right. That would bring us back to the original motion of Mr. Hickey's to postpone. I have on my list to speak Mr. Liu and then Mr. Hickey's.
Mr. Chairman, I think you answered this, but I just want to clarify, and maybe this is where we're trying to get to. Is it possible for us to accept the challenge, but then decide, you know what, we don't like the way that this thing was done, but we're just going to go to the plan anyway in the interest of time? Or does necessarily accepting the challenge mean we can't consider the plan? Can we simply just say, we accept it, we don't accept the challenge, we'll stipulate we don't love the way this was done, but we don't have a lot of time now, so we'll wait that.
I believe that, and I'm open to correction by council and parliamentarian, but I believe that if we accept the challenge, that the plan has to be returned to the state party for redrafting.
I don't think there's all I can say is we can give them direction.
We can definitely give them direction. That could be part of the motion to postpone if it was either amended or accepted as amended. Mr. Hickey's.
Well, here's what I want to accomplish. I think I want to accomplish what Chris just talked about, is to somehow fashion a process so that the staff can take a hard look at the delegate selection plan and process it and then come back to us with their comments, recommendations, whatever, but hold the challenge in abeyance. I do not want to reject the challenge. It seems to me that this body ought to be able to fashion something.
So the chair's interpretation is that that's what a motion to postpone would do, and that you or someone else could amend your motion to postpone to include the language about directing staff to work on modifications.
Well, let me give this a shot. This is not a formal motion, so don't think that I'm abandoning what I already got on the table. But I think what I would propose is a motion, and I'm not proposing a motion. This is what I might propose. What I would propose is a motion that directs the staff to, first of all, that the challenge, that we're not rejecting the challenge be held in abeyance, if that's the correct process, okay? And at the same time, that the staff be directed to look at this challenge and report forthwith where they think the deficiencies are and what has to be done to correct those deficiencies. And bring it back to us and let us figure it out and decide whether that's right, wrong, or whatever, and in effect, decide on the merits. But if we end up saying that what the staff recommends is correct, we think the rules are okay, in effect, that's deciding the challenge.
Well, we would have to actually take action on the challenge.
No, I don't disagree with you.
Okay, Ms. Lewis?
Yeah, I just want to say very quickly, if we talk about in any context rejecting the challenge out of hand, there are 8 counts, right? So we would have to go through each count, I think, if we're going to reject the challenge and say, I reject this part and this part and this part. But I think we can just say reject the challenge and just, our whole clock, just wipe the whole thing off the map here. There are eight counts there, so I don't want to lose sight.
So right now, we do not have a motion to reject the challenge. The motion now is to postpone, and either by what's been put in the record or by specific amendment, to direct staff to work with the Alabama party to draft an acceptable plan, taking into account what staff and the Alabama party think deals with the challenge. We would then decide whether the challenge has been dealt with or not.
Just real quickly, would the challengers be included in that discussion?
The challengers would undoubtedly be included in that discussion. There would be no point in bringing it back if we haven't reached something that they think, that they can give us a point of view on. Mr. Lewin, did you have a further?
Mr. Chairman, just to modify, I think there's sufficient concern among the people at the table about the process here. And in my mind, it's important to send a message that we agree with the challenge. So why can't we accept the challenge, send it back with the directions that the plan be modified in accordance with staff recommendations and include the challengers? Doesn't that give the challengers more leverage if you've accepted the challenge?
So I agree with you that it would. I do think that Mr. McDonald raised a concern that if we just say we agree with the challenge, we are setting a precedent on all 8 points in there. And we might prefer to hold back on that and simply postpone consideration with instructions. In other words, hold the challenge in abeyance and postpone consideration of the plan while staff evaluates the plan for deficiencies and provides a recommendation.
In consultation with the challengers.
That is what I'm hearing involved with the challengers. Mr. Hickey.
It seems to me that I'm trying to articulate what I intend. That by postponing the challenge, we are not, David and Frank, listen to this. By postponing the challenge, we are not necessarily saying we accept it or reject it. And that we are directing the staff, or Patrice, to take a hard look at this and report back to us forthwith, or to the co-chairs forthwith, as to what her her team's recommendations are with respect to the challenge, and then make a decision at that point.
Well, I would say with respect to the plan, taking into account the addicts of the challenge.
Yeah, I'm sorry. You're right.
Mr. Fowler.
I think I agree with what you and Mr. Higgins just agreed to. I don't think we should send this back to the Alabama Democratic Party without specifying some of the features of their party that do not comply with our rules. I think that is a necessary part. If we adopt that and leave it up to Patrice or you, the two co-chairs, to make that list of specificities, and we direct or at least offer the Alabama Party an opportunity to resubmit, we should do that and give them a time limit. And we, I think, have set the stage for a conclusive decision by us, this committee. If we point out the things that they have in their plan that violate our rules and give them an opportunity to adopt a plan that conforms to these rules and a plan that includes the other necessary parts of the delegate selection plan. And if there's any purpose in that, I would make it as a substitute motion or just leave it for somebody else to do that. But I think we should not send this back to the Alabama Party without telling them very specifically the things that we find objectionable and not in compliance with our delegate selection.
So I think that would be the intent of asking staff to evaluate the plan for deficiencies and to provide recommendations. So I have Mr. Berman, and then Patrice.
So I want to build on what Harold and Don have said, because I think we're going in the right direction. We're almost there. So I think we should hold the challenge in advance, that we should direct the staff to give them specific guidance on how to come into compliance. There's not that many substantive issues here, that they should have a fixed period of time in which to respond, and if there's a failure to respond, they're automatically in non-compliance without a further cause.
That's going to require some amendment of the motion, I think, to get all that in there, but I hear where you're going there. Patrice, did you want to comment first?
One thing that I wanted to raise for the committee's consideration is our understanding of the version of the plan that we have is that ballot access activity will be beginning very early in September. The state party facilitates ballot access on behalf of both presidential candidates and delegate candidates. And our understanding is that the ballot access deadline is November 8th. So I don't know if it would please the committee to allow for the state party to continue with ballot access so that delegate candidates can gather signatures and do the work so that they are not excluded from being on the ballot, and the same for presidential candidates during this period of time.
Mr. Goodman and then Mr. Hickey.
Now, we've been here a long time discussing this one little issue, and I'm making it longer because I'm throwing some 2 cents in the mouth. I think this committee probably unanimously believes that the Alabama plan is flawed, which because they believe that if not all 8 counts from the challenge, but some are valid. Now, I vote for a candidate not because I believe in every single thing that candidate stands for, but because I am comfortable that that candidate knows what they're talking about in enough issues that they earn my vote. I believe this committee, and I should be accepting the challenge because we believe it, and not because we believe it all they can. We don't have to. We believe that some of us may believe in 3 of their 8 counts, and another may think a different 3. But we still believe that some of their actions and their counts have merit. I think that this committee is doing itself a disservice by trying to tiptoe around the real issue that the Alabama plan is flawed, seriously flawed, at least in my view, and that we should be accepting the challenge and then directing the staff, if we don't want to send it back to the Alabama officers to rework it again, and create a committee with our staff and several from the challenge group and several from the Alabama core leadership, and give them a certain amount of time to sit and hammer it out, or that the end game is that the RBC hammer it out for them and provide a plan that needs to be voted on with all those in Alabama to see if they will adopt a plan that meets our approval and moves that along quickly. So my thought is, and I second the motion to sort of put this off, but I really believe that we should be adopting the challenge.
So are you withdrawing your second?
I am withdrawing my second.
So there's now not a second for postponement. Instead, I know that if there is not a second, you will make a motion to accept the challenge with the expectation that that means that there will be, that staff will work with the Alabama party to come up with an acceptable plan.
Right. That's a substitute motion.
Right?
Right.
Right. All right. So is there any second for the motion? I'm not taking further discussion right now, because right now we don't have a motion on the floor because there's no second. Is there a second for the motion to postpone?
Second.
All right, there's a second for the motion to postpone. We'll go back to discussion. Mr. Ickes.
I'm not sure. I understand the optics. I'm not quite sure what the difference between what Barry is proposing and postponing it, but that's not for this. Now, what I wanted to raise is there is a very serious two questions about the list. I don't know how to deal with that, but there's valid issues about the list. And this election was conducted and administered by insiders who had a vested interest in a certain outcome. This election was not administered by neutral parties. And I think there's an issue about how the ballots were returned, who saw them first, and so that they could be actionable to make calls to get other people out to vote. So it's not here to litigate this, but those are issues that I think are very serious issues.
I'm going to point out that the vote on every state plan is conducted by the state party leadership that's been in place in that given state. So if that's defined as insiders, we've got a whole lot to deal with. Mr. Fowler.
I thought we had a motion that we were about to vote on, and somehow, in a parliamentary sense, it slipped away.
We do have a motion. It is a motion.
What Frank said, I think, sums up essentially what we're looking for. But I do think that we have an obligation, this committee and particularly the staff, has an obligation to point out to the Alabama party some of the things that are clearly in violation of our rules. And we shouldn't just send it back without commentary. We should give some guidance. And I think that should be a part of the motion.
I think we've had a lot of record created here about people's views that there are deficiencies that are cited in the challenge. I think that, and I think, Mr. Ickes, you may, I'll ask you if you agree with this, that the motion to postpone, in effect, holds the challenge in abeyance and directs the staff to evaluate the plan for deficiencies and provide a recommendation. Is that correct?
I move the previous question.
The previous question has been moved. It is not debatable.
Yeah, I just wanted to return.
Is this a point of order?
Well, it's, can we have just a little more discussion?
No, we have a.
Listen, only because
We have a motion to call the question.
Right. I agree with you.
Yes. We have a motion to call the question.
You had earlier mentioned modifying that motion to include the fact that they would have a time limit, and if they didn't submit in that time, that there would be an.
So I will state that if the motion to postpone is adopted, the co-chairs will set the speediest time limit that the rules allow. And if the time limit is not complied with, then there will not be a plan that's in compliance. Yes, Mr. Max.
I know you've already heard from me. I just wanted to state our position, what Patrice just said about the possibility, if there's a way to structure this, so that we can go ahead with the ballot access parts, the presidential candidates gathering signatures, which I don't think is controversial in any way. I've just spoken to the Challengers Council. He doesn't seem to object. He can speak for himself, but he doesn't seem to object to that happening. I don't know if you think there's a way for you to do that, but Patrice raised it, and we would greatly appreciate that if that is possible. Slow down the process for the presidential candidates.
Mr. Chairman, I suggest that question be left in the hands of our two co-chairs.
I think that's I would accept that suggestion in that I don't think if the committee hasn't taken action on the plan, nothing can happen that as a result of the plan. The co-chairs could direct that certain things take place. Mr. Young, did you have?
Yeah, I have a suggestion that will address your point, and I think everyone else's, and we'll leave today with Alabama having a valid plan, and that is simply to adopt the challenge before you. There are only 3 remedies requested. The first one is that we there are only 3 remedies being requested by this challenge. The first one is that we adopt a 10B requiring that the quorum of the district political delegates select the at-large. Second requirement, some adjustments to the representation goals. And the third is that the committee approve that plan in person. That's all this challenge is for. If you simply approve the challenge, all of this moves forward.
Mr. Chairman, we have a motion on the floor and question.
Yeah, sure, absolutely right. Mr. Fowler, the question has been called on the motion to postpone consideration of the plan, thereby holding the challenge in advance and directing staff to evaluate the plan for deficiencies, including those pointed out in the challenge, and come back to this committee with recommendations. Everyone in agreement that that's the motion that's before us? Without objection, we will move. We have first a motion to call the question. All those in favor of calling the question, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Abstentions. All right. Question has been called on the motion that is now before us, which is to postpone the plan and thereby hold the challenge in abeyance and direct staff to evaluate the plan for deficiencies and provide recommendations to this committee for action on the plan. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
No.
Any abstentions? I believe the ayes have it. So the motion is adopted. Ms. Lewis?
So just a quick question on point of clarification. Included in those discussions with staff and what staff is going to do and ultimate decisions that the chairs will make in terms of timeline and deadlines and whatever, there will be, I think it needs to just be on the record that there will be consultation not only with the state party but with the challengers. I really think that needs to be
There will definitely be discussion with both the state party and the challengers, and there will be a timeline, deadlines set out by the co-chairs.
Okay.
Yes, Ms. Martinez.
I have a question, so I'm a little confused on something. So I know that earlier it was mentioned that the Credentials Committee, the seating of this state party, the way it was done,
So there was problems with that. So has that been settled? I mean, is this same committee in Alabama State Party, are they the ones that are going to be again suggesting the changes and everything? Is the same people that gave us all these problems as far as all these challenges? But I'm a little confused as to we're putting it back to them again. I'm confused on that. Because there was
Your
a challenge.
confusion is legitimate because it will be the same state party.
Right.
However, the issues raised by the challengers will be taken into account, and we will present to this committee a recommendation that certain actions be taken in order for the plan to be found in compliance.
The actions to be taken by the same state party right now that has caused a lot of the issues on the way their election was.
Yes, and they would, and if the plan is to be approved, they would have to agree to the actions that we direct. Yes. It is still the same state party. I know you are correct about that. Yeah. Any further questions? All right.
I have a question, please.
Yes.
Just a procedural question. So I hear what you're saying about them going back with guidance from the chiefs and everything, staff, and if they don't comply, they'll be out of compliance. When I think about the last 9 months, when they've not met all these deadlines and just pretty much said rules and bylaws, what's going to be different this time? What is going to be the actionable?
What has to be done to get an approvable plan?
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chairman, may I just make one little comment?
I'm turning the gavel over to you.
I came to the meeting today with a heavy heart, but I think the beauty of what we've decided to do today speaks volumes about this committee and its commitment to the voters in Alabama. That we try to work something out, as Randy so eloquently said, to try to make sure that people in Alabama can express themselves openly, fairly, and transparently. So I thank you. It has been long. This was not, we did not plan to have this lengthy discussion on this today. But I think you do the voters of Alabama a giant favor in what you decided to do. And with that, we'll move forward with consideration of the proposed resolution on weighted voting. So, colleagues, you received a draft of an RBC resolution on the use of weighted voting. I'm sorry. We'll take a 2-minute break. 2 minutes.
More than 5 seconds. All right.